Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are unpacking one of the most sprawling, frankly bizarre, and ultimately dangerous myths of the 20th century. We're going to trace the unbelievable evolution of the so-called Vril society. As you'll see, this is a story that mutates from a completely harmless piece of Victorian science fiction into this massive, modern-day conspiracy theory.
Okay, so did a secret society actually use supernatural energy to build flying saucers for the Third Reich? I know, it sounds exactly like the plot of a wild Hollywood blockbuster, but this is a very real, explosive claim that is actively circulating on the fringes of the internet today. The story basically goes that a deeply hidden occult group possessed these otherworldly powers, and they literally gave the Nazis access to advanced alien technologies. It's a wildly captivating hook, right? But before we get swept away by it, let's take a step back and reverse engineer exactly how this myth was built.
So here's the absolute baseline reality we need to set right out of the gate. The Vril society was completely fictitious. There is zero, and I mean zero, historical evidence that an organization by this name ever operated as a powerful secret society. And there's definitely no proof for the incredible technological achievements attributed to it. By establishing this reality up front, we can clinically examine this piece of pseudo-history and understand how such a colossal fiction was actually constructed.
Okay, let's dive into our roadmap for today. Number 1, the Vril society myth. 2, origins of a sci-fi force. 3, the occult reality. 4, birth of the legend. 5, aliens and Nazi UFOs. And finally, number 6, reinterpreting the Third Reich. Starting off with Section 1, the Vril society myth, supernatural energies, and the Third Reich.
Let's open up this mystery box fully, because the sheer massive scale of the modern myth is just wild. According to these pseudo-historical texts, the Vril Society wasn't just some casual weekend book club. They are claimed to have been deeply, fundamentally involved in the rise of Nazism itself. They supposedly harnessed a supernatural energy called Vril and used it to develop Reichsflugscheiben, which, literally translates to saucer-shaped flying machines or Nazi UFOs. Throw in claims of intergalactic telepathic communication, and you have this narrative that seamlessly blends esoteric occultism with pseudo-historical science fiction.
Moving right along to Section 2, Origins of a Sci-Fi Force, Edward Bulwer Lytton's 1871 novel.
So where did this all actually begin? Well, let's pivot sharply away from the 20th century and travel all the way back to the year 1871 to trace this massive historical game of telephone. Because it all starts with a simple work of fiction. The English writer Edward Bulwer Lytton published a sci-fi novel called The Coming Race. He coined the term Vril, which likely derives from the Latin word virilis, basically meaning manly or powerful. In the book, the narrator discovers this subterranean, highly evolved race of humans called the Vrilia. Now, keep in mind, contemporary critics at the time just saw this as a fun, Jules Verne-style entertainment novel, or maybe a bit of social satire.
But take a look at the powers Bulwer Lytton gave to this fictional Vril energy. It granted the user telepathy and telekinesis, it could heal the sick, literally resurrect the dead, or cause the absolute destruction of matter. It was basically a classic sci-fi superweapon. However, certain sections of the public started reading the book not as fiction, but as a literal occult text carrying secret ancient knowledge. Famous occultists like Helena Blavatsky later adopted the term Vril, portraying it as a real, magical force that was actually used by the ancient inhabitants of Atlantis. So here we see fiction slowly bleeding into supposed fact.
Which brings us to Section 3, the occult reality, fringe groups in pre-war Berlin.
Let's move forward in time to the 1920s and 30s to examine the verifiable historical reality here. Were there actual Vril believers in pre-war Germany? Yes, actually there were, but they were absolutely nothing like the conspiracy theories claim. And honestly, this quote brilliantly illustrates the absurdity of the historical reality. This is from Willy Ley, a German rocket pioneer who fled to America. In 1947, he wrote an article trying to explain the popularity of irrational beliefs in pre-war Germany. He mentioned this tiny fringe group in Berlin, which he recalled being called the Truth Society. They were literally searching for the fictional Vril force. And how did they try to unlock this world-altering power? By intensely staring at an apple cut in half. I am not joking, Ley was told this with absolute seriousness. They were a tiny group with zero political power.
Let's compare Ley's apple-staring True Society with another historically documented group from 1930 called the RAG, or the Reich Working Group. The RAG actually published pamphlets claiming they had the technology to utilize Vril force. But when modern historians examine these pamphlets, what do they find? They find plans for perpetual motion machines that are essentially plagiarized from another Austrian inventor, and they're just explained using occult terms rather than actual physics. Whether the Truth Society and the RAG were the exact same group or just similar ones, the takeaway is crystal clear. These were highly marginalized fringe groups with purely pseudo-scientific ambitions. They were definitely not secret masters plotting global domination.
Section 4. Birth of the Legend, Post-War Mythology. So you might be wondering, how on earth did staring at apples and drawing up fake perpetual motion machines turn into a myth about Nazi flying saucers? Well, watch how this snowballing fiction builds over time. We start with the 1871 novel, then the 1930 RAG pamphlets, followed by Willy Lay's 1947 article about the Truth Society. The massive turning point happens in 1960. French authors Louis Pauwels and Jacques Bergier published a wildly popular book called The Morning of the Magicians. Taking a tiny, almost microscopic grain of truth from Willy's article, they vastly exaggerated it, falsely claiming for the very first time that a Vril society was a central, highly influential Nazi organization trying to form alliances with supernatural powers. They provided zero historical evidence for this, but the myth was out of the bottle.
And that leads us to Section 5, Aliens and Nazi UFOs. The myth goes extraterrestrial.
Because once a myth is out of the bottle, it mutates. Fast forward to the 1990s, the narrative engine goes into absolute overdrive, and the conspiracy becomes full-blown science fiction. In 1992, authors Norbert Jürgen Rethofer and Ralph Edel published a text called The Vril Project. And wow, did they add some bizarre layers to the legend. They claimed that back in the 1920s, a medium named Maria Orsic made telepathic contact with aliens from the Aldebaran star system. Supposedly, she channeled blueprints for flying saucers, and her secret society used their really long hair as antennas for vibrational magic. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. The story concludes with the claim that in 1945, members of this society, along with the SS, used these UFOs to escape to a secret Antarctic base called New Swabia. This highly elaborate fan fiction was then popularized to a massive audience by other esoteric authors like Jan Udo Hawley.
Okay, we really have to pause here and separate the mythology from the reality, clinically and objectively. On one side, we have the myth. Massive influence on Hitler, advanced alien UFOs, and a telepathic medium named Maria Orsic. On the reality side, there is absolutely zero verifiable historical evidence that Maria Orsic ever even existed. None. The real-world groups interested in Vril were tiny, mathematically illiterate fringe circles with zero influence on the Nazi high command. There was no Vril technology, and there were for sure no flying saucers. The contrast between the story and the truth is just incredibly stark.
Which brings us to our final section. Section 6. Reinterpreting the Third Reich, the Real Danger.
Now at this point, you might be thinking this is all just a silly, harmless sci-fi story, right? Unfortunately, it's not. The Vril legend has been weaponized. Recent variations of these myths are actively used by right-wing esoteric movements and esoteric neo-Nazism to positively reinterpret and valorize the Third Reich. By linking the horrors of the Nazi regime to ancient mysticism, advanced alien technology, and cosmic destinies, these authors attempt to wash away the grim historical reality of war crimes and genocide. Concepts like the Vril Society and the Black Sun symbol are not just harmless internet lore, they are deliberate ideological tools. They're used to glorify a dark past and recruit people into extremist ways of thinking through the back door of science fiction and the occult.
Which leaves us with this final, truly provocative question. How can a 19th century sci-fi novel about an underground utopia be weaponized to positively spin the atrocities of the Third Reich today? It really shows us the terrifying power of a good story, the telephone game of history, and how easily fiction can be mutated into a dangerous conspiracy theory if we aren't careful to check the facts. It's a stark reminder for all of us to always question the sources of the modern myths we encounter online. I really hope this explainer has helped you separate the sci-fi from the reality today. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive, and I'll catch you next time.